G'day, it's Professor Joseph Drew here. I'm here to talk to you this time about long COVID. It's not the long COVID you're thinking of, the symptoms that continue way after you've had COVID. No, what I'm talking about here is long COVID in a public policy sense. A long time after we've all forgotten about COVID, we're still going to be living with the consequences of public policy decisions that have been made over the last 20 months or so. And I'm just going to explain some of these problems and try to get people to understand that we've got a long road ahead of us to return to anything like normal. So first of all is debt. You know, worldwide debt has risen at the fastest levels recorded. Worldwide debt as a ratio of GDP is actually at the highest levels at any post-war time. Indeed, the total debt, global debt, exceeds the total global output. That's a problem. This debt has to be paid back. It can either be paid back through reduced expenditure from government, increase revenue, increase taxes, and you know the OECD have cut a deal to increase corporate tax. The idea there is that that's less politically damaging than it would be to increase personal income taxes, because corporations don't vote. But of course the corporations just pass those tax increase on to the consumers in large anyway, so you will be paying for it. So we can increase taxes, and we can also pay off the debt in a sneaky way by allowing inflation to increase. That's essentially a tax on stored wealth of people and corporations. Now, in Australia, we've racked up well over $1 trillion worth of debt now. It has to be paid back. This modern monetary theory is a fantasy that you can rack up debt and never have any implications from doing so. Anyone that can remember back to the 1970s know how dire the implications are, and we've created a huge burden for future generations. Inflation, as I say, can be one of the ways of paying back debt. It also tends to occur because what we're doing is we're bringing forward the use of resources, and we're bringing forward the use of resources specifically for government, which tends not to be the most efficient user of resources and tends not to be the most careful spender. They're much more likely to overpay for things than what you and I are likely to do so, because it's not their money, as the great Milton Friedman said. So it's no surprise at all that inflation is rising. We were told it was going to be transitory, and then we were told it was going to be mostly transitory. Now we're told it's going to be sticky. I'm telling you it's here for a long, long time, and long after we've forgotten about COVID, we're going to be dealing with the consequences of inflation. But there's a trust issue, and I think that dwarfs the issues of debt and inflation. This is a picture of I believe, a 70-year-old lady who was deliberately knocked down. I've watched the video from several sources, and then while she was on the ground, some of our brave policemen decided to spray her in the face with pepper spray, capsicum spray. Two of them you can see in this photo. That sort of image will cause a lot of distrust in the community towards the police, towards the government, and also people from other countries looking at this thinking, is Australia a free democracy or not? Are we safe to travel to Australia? It's not surprising these sorts of images that have gone around the world, viral around the world, are giving people a lot of reason to reconsider their trust in the police, their trust in government, their trust in Australia, their trust in democracy. And long after COVID's gone away, we are going to be dealing with the distrust that people have. And when people don't trust government, when people don't trust police, they're less likely to cooperate. It makes it harder for government and police to do their job. And I think it's been very short-sighted, some of the actions of some of these police. And at the end of the day, they require the cooperation of the community to have any chance at all to do their job. And a lot of people are going to be less cooperative than what they have been in the past. And human dignity. Human dignity, as I've said many times, is your right to pursue your existential ends without undue interference. Now, a precedent has now been set to lock you in your homes for extended periods of time, to constrain who you can and cannot associate with, to constrain what you can and cannot say, to determine and stipulate what medical treatments you must have, and not only what medical treatments you must have, but what brands of medical treatment you must have. That's a scary precedent. Now, it's not hard to get to a conspiracy theory whereby the government decides that another medication is necessary and important for us and stipulates that, or we decide that alcohol, tobacco, sugar, fat puts your lives at risk, and we stipulate how much you can take of those things. It was always the theory, the fear of the ancients, the fear of people writing constitutions, that government would trample human dignity, that they would concentrate too much power, and they would use that power to coerce people against their will to do things. And a precedent has been set. When and if another pandemic comes along, the go-to thinking will be, let's lock down, let's shut our borders, let's enforce and stipulate and mandate certain medical treatments. And that's a really scary thought. Australia is a federation. There is a strong strand of political research on federations, and one in particular was Riker's theory of federations, and basically he said that over time what was likely is that power would be centralised with the federal government, and over time the federation would become more like a unitary state, and in fact the federation might be abandoned entirely because the federal government would just take over the power. He did look at the potential for the opposite to happen, where the power was peripherized, so that more and more power went to the states or the countries that made up the federation. And he said under those circumstances, the federation would fall apart. Now, what's happened in Australia during COVID is we've gone from highly centralized power, where the federal government was calling the shots on most things, mainly because they had the money, because they had the taxing powers, income taxing powers, to a situation where all of a sudden it's the state premiers calling the shots. It's the state premiers deciding if we're going to have Australians return to their country or not after 20 months of being exiled. It's the state premiers deciding if we're going to have foreign students coming back or not. It's the state premiers deciding whether Australians are going to be allowed out of their houses or not, allowed to associate with others or not. It's not the federal government. The federal government's made roadmaps, the federal government has made agreements, but the state governments are marching to their own tune. Western Australia in particular are doing their own thing, irrespective of what the other states are doing and what the federal government says should be done. Now, that is clearly a case of power being peripherized, and the political theory suggests that it will ultimately result in the demise of our federation. And it's for the simple reason that it's hard for people to feel solidarity, feel like they're one nation when they're living under completely different regimes. I'm allowed to go outside my house in New South Wales. In a lot of states, that may not be possible. Some states are allowing vaccinated people to do certain things. Other states aren't allowing anyone to do it. There's different rules. I can't travel to Western Australia. Why should I feel any sense of solidarity with Western Australians when I can't go there? I can't interact with them. I can't even trade openly with them. And the only thing I seem to have in common at the moment is that I pay the same federal rate of tax, and a lot of my tax money goes to these other states. But over time, a lot of people are going to start to understand that, particularly states where they have a net loss to the federal government, like New South Wales, and wonder, well, why are we a part of this federation? What are we getting out of it? All it's doing is costing us money. They won't even let us visit or go there. Why should we be paying extra taxes to support these other states? So, in conclusion, there is a thing called long COVID in a public policy sense, as well as in a physical sense. You know, I wish that people had thought more about human nature. And that's what natural law philosophy is all about. That's where the word nature comes from. It's all about human nature. And it's all about ultimate ends. And that the purpose of government is to help us to reach our ultimate ends, be all that we can be. But during COVID, the purpose of government, or what government has felt they had to do, was to restrict me from achieving my ends. They've been acting contrary to their purpose in a teleological sense. And I think that's going to have big implications for every Australian, big implications for how governments act in the future, and big implications for the burdens that we'll have to deal with in coming years. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.